let me just introduce Michael real quick and then he can get into it. Michael's an alum of Bucknell. This is Michael Malice. He's an alum of Bucknell. I won't tell you his class year. I think he said he forgets.
Thanks for telling them my jokes.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's a New York-based author and celebrity ghostwriter. He was the co-creator and founding editor of Overheard in New York. He's the author of Dear Reader, the unauthorized autobiography of Kim Jong-il, which is available for sale after this talk. His early life was the subject of Harvey Picar's biography, Ego and Hubris, which I definitely recommend if you can get a copy of. He talks about his experience at Bucknell, and that one's definitely worth just checking out those portions of it. And
the rest is just filler.
Well, that's where I went to first. And Michael is a regular guest on Fox News and Fox Business. So with that, I'm gonna just hand it over to him and let him go for it.
Thanks, Tom. It's weird being back here since I graduated, I gotta say. But let's talk about another terrible place, which is North Korea. So you reach a certain point when you're an author and you decide to kind of give back a little bit. And I saw that all the reporting about North Korea was misleading and erroneous and kind of weird, so I decided to do something about it. I was born in the former Soviet Union. I'm Jewish, so these were two chances that I could have been sent to a concentration camp. And they have concentration camps. It's pretty much the last place on Earth that has them. You can see them on Google Earth. There's like somewhere between 200 and 300,000 people there right now. And the amazing thing about North Korea is, people come to it from, Team America World Police, or they come to it in a humorous context. And now I have it down when I do radio interviews and they start getting, they're like, haha, Kim Jong-un. I have them go from laughing to kind of suicidal within 15 seconds. Because it's as soon as you point out what it is that you're laughing at, people are like, how did I ever think this was funny? The best example of this was I was on NPR once, and the host said that Kim Jong-il is a campy figure, and I said it's a very unfortunate choice of words, and she did not have a happy day after that.
Not a happy camp.
But it's not a happy camper. So, and just briefly, I was just on the show Kennedy last week, when people are talking in the press about, what if we bring the military in, what can we do, and I'm going to get to that later. All those people in those camps are told constantly and explicitly, if the U.S. imperialists come here, we are going to kill you all and burn these camps down. So the day one, if there's any attack on North Korea, you're going to have genocide, and everyone in the Japanese government, Chinese, South Korean, and American government knows it. So this is the seriousness of the regime. So whenever you see articles that talk about things, I remember one that really drove me crazy, Kim Jong-un's mini-skirted robot army, about how all the female soldiers march in these parades, and look how silly. The thing to understand about North Korea is this is a country of 20 million hostages who have guns to their head at all times, and they have something called the Yangoje, which is the family purge, where unlike America, and I make this joke in the book, where you hear conservative politicians say things like, the family is the basic unit of society, right? We've all heard that expression. Well, they put that into practice. What that means is when someone is punished, they punish their whole family. That's what unit means. So they take 3 generations. They don't have trials. Someone will come to your door in the middle of the night. 3 generations of your family are taken and vanished overnight. And the insane thing is how we found out about this increasingly, and why George W. Bush put North Korea on the axis of evil. There was a book called The Aquariums of Pyongyang. People actually get out of the camps. So they'll send them for like a sentence, they don't tell you how long, and then after 5 years you get to go back to society, and you have to kind of sign a non-disclosure agreement that says you're not going to talk about what happens there. And the camps are really, really bad, even by concentration camp standards, and I'll get to that in a second. So I was on Facebook, and my friend Ed, who's also a Bucknell alum, who, when I was here, I didn't realize this, spread a rumor that I had AIDS. Thanks, Ed. And as a result of this, whenever I write about him, I always make sure to insult him. When I wrote about my trip, I always refer to his dim-witted grin. I was on Facebook and I saw his dim-witted grin in Pyongyang, which is the capital of North Korea, and he's smiling, as a dimwit does, in front of the tanks. And I emailed him and I'm like, how did you get into North Korea? And the answer obviously was, I met someone at Burning Man. And the guy, obviously, and the guy manages tours there. And it turns out going to North Korea is legal. Any American can go. It's not cheap. There is one flight in and out of Beijing, or you can take the train in from China, They desperately want our money because North Korea produces nothing of value. So if they want to trade with other countries, they have to have hard currency because the North Korea currency is valueless. If you go there, it is safer there than it is, I'm from New York, it's safer there than it is in New York. Because you are in a country where human life means nothing, you are a guest of the government. So if I had killed someone, I would just be deported. Because all that matters is they want my dollars. Like, if you do something bad to their citizens, it's not as bad as what they do to their citizens every single day. So it's a very weird, and let's talk briefly about, I'm gonna jump around a little bit. Recently you heard all these stories about people who were visiting North Korea and they were detained by the government. And let's go through them step by step. One is a guy brought a Bible. And you were told on the plane, do not bring religious propaganda. This is a communist country. And it's just like if you went to Washington, D.C. or New York and you had a kilo of cocaine and you left it in your hotel room, probably weighs about the same as a Bible, what do you think is going to happen to you? The second case was a guy went to one of the buildings and stole a poster. Well, you go to the White House and try to take down that Hillary Clinton painting, what do you think is going to happen to you? Then there was a veteran of the Korean War. It's like, yeah, they look at you like a Nazi, don't go there. And the last was someone who was also trying to, the reporter, Laura Ling or Lisa Ling, whatever, she was in China, she had a camera crew, and they told her, don't come here. And she's like, I'm a reporter. And they're like, don't come here. She came there with her camera crew. She had been interviewing people who were refugees. They caught her. She claimed she started burning all her notes because obviously when you're detained by the police, the first thing they do is give you an opportunity to destroy any evidence you have. I guarantee that all those people rounded up and had very bad consequences. And they, of course, treated her very well when she was in jail. And the term for going to a country unasked with secret cameras is spying. So all of these cases were things that were evidently preventable. So I would absolutely encourage anyone to go because hopefully it's not going to be around much longer. So let me describe what it's like when you land there. It is like going to another planet back in time. Because you walk around Bucknell, you walk around Boston, you walk around London. Things you see kind of, okay, this is a little different from where it is back home. This is similar to what is back home. Everything is weird. And everything is there for a reason, but you don't have a secret decoder ring. So you're like, why is this like this? And you have no idea. So like the buildings are all weird, and the structures are all weird, and the people are weird, but you're not going to have an understanding. And the thing is, they're also time travelers from different eras. So when I was in the airport, you saw a guy in the military dressed up in like 50s army clothes, and he stops a lady on her cell phone who's obviously wealthy and powerful, and she's all decked out in like 1980s fashion, which is like as recently as they got to in North Korea. And it's like, wow, I'm talking to people from two different eras. And what's increasingly the case, we think that people there are living in constant terror, but it's increasingly becoming a cash economy. So the police don't have as much power as the wealthy. So that is a good thing because the less power the police have, the less power they have to implement the horrors of the regime. So let me talk a little bit about how this regime came into being. The Japanese conquered the North Koreans in like 1905 or so. And what's fascinating is by law in North Korea, whenever you refer to Japanese or Americans, you have to use a slur. So when you're reading the books, which I did as research for my book, and they're translated into English, it'll be matter of fact. It'll be like in 1905, the wicked Jap bastards conquered Korea, and you're like, wait, and it's like a history book, but there'll be all these like the Yank Devils or things like that. And it's very kind of jarring because they're trying to make a point, but they're using this very offensive language. The Japanese conquer Korea, they make it a colony of Japan. Now, this isn't like Japan of today. These are the people who would later sit down with Hitler and say, I like what you're saying and I like how you're saying it, let's be best friends. So they made Korea a complete slave colony. They tried to make Korean illegal to be spoken. They made everyone have to take Japanese names, and they basically used them as slave labor for decades. Many of you are familiar with what they did with China with the rape of Nanking, so there's sexual assault. And the Japanese armies boasted that having sexual assault is good for the army because it keeps the men strong. So it's a very, very dark and wicked period in Korea's history. And then, of course, you had World War II, when Japan was defeated, and I'll get to in a second, Korea gets split. According to their mythology, what actually happened instead of World War II was there was this man who came into being called the great leader Kim Il-sung. And he was Kim Jong-il's father. Now, people are familiar with Kim Jong-il, not so much about Kim Il-sung, but that's kind of like liking Nancy Sinatra, but not understanding about Frank Sinatra, because everything in North Korea is a function of the grandfather, Kim Il-sung, the great leader, and Kim Jong-il is very much a faded reflection of his dad. So according to their mythology, right before World War II, Kim Il-sung and his band of guerrilla rebels are fighting the Japanese in the mountains, and it's, they're these ragtag band, and they're the only things keeping Koreans, kind of on the path. And their propaganda is very, very brilliant because every criticism you might have, they address. So when you point out, how come there's no historical record of any of this, of Kim Il-sung being here and fighting the Japanese at the time, they go, well, that's how pervasive the Japanese censorship was. Their censorship was so strong, there's no historical evidence left that Kim Il-sung was fighting the Japanese at the time. So according to their mythology, rather than the US defeating the Japanese in Germany during World War II, it was Kim Il-sung single-handedly, the great leader, who drove the wicked Jap devils out of Japan and liberated Korea. Now what actually happens is, after World War II and the Axis powers are defeated, the US and the Soviet Union came together and they divided up the world. And the Soviet Union got East Germany, we got West Germany, we got the Philippines, they got some other places. To their credit, the North Koreans are very bothered by the fact that Korea, which was not an enemy combatant in World War II, was the only country that was divided in half other than Germany. So what happened was, they're like, all right, we're gonna split Korea. The Americans wanted Seoul. They took a map, they drew a line directly north of Seoul, and they said, we're gonna get the south, you guys are gonna get the north. They install Kim Il-sung as their leader, and what we did, just like we did in Iraq, just like we did in Afghanistan, we found someone who was going to be sympathetic to our interests, whose name was Syngman Rhee, and he was basically the dictator of South Korea. And they both declared themselves the leaders of the entire country. So you have two competing governments, one based in the north in Pyongyang, one based in the south in Seoul. According to their propaganda, North Korea remains the most homogenous and most racist country on earth. According to propaganda, Korea was the first country on earth, Korean was the first language spoken on earth, and Korea is the only country where the bloodline has remained pure for thousands of years, as opposed to every other country which is Mongolized by inbreeding. So they're very, very big on racial purity, and there's very many parallels to fascism, specifically Nazism, and militarism in North Korea. So Kim Il-sung wants to conquer the whole country. He keeps sending letters to Stalin, who was the head of the Soviet Union at the time. One historian describes him as stamping his feet, trying to get the go-ahead, let me conquer the South. Eventually, Stalin relents. 1953, Kim Il-sung and his army has a sneak attack. At one point, they have 95% of the Korean peninsula. The US and the UN counterattack, and then for 3 years or so, they're fighting back and forth, and eventually the fighting draws to a stalemate, where it all started, because Chairman Mao in China joins in on the north side. And what happens is, you have China and Soviet Union over here, you have the US and the UN over here, and poor Korea stuck in the middle, and the entire country was pretty much decimated. As you'd expect, you have a pebble between two boulders. So this is their creation myth. So according to them, the 1950s was not that long ago. At any moment, we are going to, as soon as they let down the guard, the US imperialists are going to come back and destroy the entire country. And the only thing keeping North Korea safe is the leader. First it was Kim Il-sung, then Kim Jong-il, now Kim Jong-un. And we've been desperate to have a foothold in Asia for 150 years, and they're the only ones keeping us safe. So Stalin dies in 1953, and the Soviet Union starts, and all these other communist countries start de-Stalinizing, by which they mean Khrushchev gave a speech and he goes, look, Stalin committed all these atrocities, we have all these gulags, people are getting killed by the thousands for no reasons, we're gonna have a kinder, gentler Soviet Union. North Korea said no, they started doubling down. So what Kim Il-sung started doing is people who had studied abroad started getting executed. Learning foreign languages became illegal. Books from other countries became illegal to own. They had big book burnings. And basically, he started heavily consolidating power and building up this religion based upon himself as the great leader, because he kicked out the wicked Jap devils, then he kicked out the US imperialists, and he's the only one who's standing and keeping Korea safe and pure. So this Ayn Rand had this quote that says, "Errors of this magnitude are never made innocently." There was a step-by-step process as they start strangling the country and destroying these people. One of the things they started doing in the 50s was something called the Understanding People Project. Now, I want to understand people, you guys want to understand people, sounds great. What does this mean? They interviewed every single person in the country, everybody, and they figured out what was your family doing in the years prior to the Korean War, as they called the Fatherland Liberation War. Were you a wealthy landlord? Were you born in the South or, God forbid, abroad? Were you a fighter with the great leader Kim Il-sung? Based on this, and they rated your family up to your second cousins. You were given a Sunbun score, which is like a credit score, and you're not told what your credit score is. That slots you into the favorable, wavering, or hostile class. And then there's like 51 subclasses. This determines who you marry, whether you can go to school, and most importantly, where you live. So if you were a member of the hostile class, you are not allowed near the capital city or near the oceans. So the only place that left in the Korean Peninsula was the Northeast. So all the people who had a bad sunbun were sent to the Northeast. You're not allowed to travel within the country. You are told what city to live in, and that's where you have to live. Come the 60s, Kim Jong-il starts coming into power. He's put in charge of their agitation and propaganda department. He starts remaking the North Korean film industry. And him and his uncle start competing to see who's going to gain favor with the great leader. And they each start making his mythology heavier and heavier and stronger. And as you read the literature, it's very interesting because just like in Orwell in 1984, the details start fading away. So for example, if I read a book from the 70s, it would say something like, Kim Il-sung went to Romania to attend the funeral of its president. And I'd read the same story in a book 10 years later. It said, a few years ago, Kim Il-sung went to a foreign country to attend an event, and the story would be the same. So details about the outside world start increasingly falling away. If we go to a classroom, elementary school in America, you're gonna have an atlas of the whole world. But if you go to North Korea, you're just gonna have an atlas of Korea. So they don't know really about other countries, and what's fascinating is, when you go there, North and South Korea, it's always lowercase n and lowercase s, because Korea is one country whose southern region is under occupation by the US imperialists, so it's always lowercase n and lowercase s. So they know very little. Like my guy didn't know about the Holocaust. They're not really aware of Hiroshima and Nagasaki or that people have been on the moon, because if it's not about Korea, they don't have to know it. And this ideology is something that they call the Juche idea, which is basically having everything in our way. The word is absolutely meaningless because they have Juche magic tricks, and Juche gymnastics, and Juche archaeology, and Juche music. Kim Jong-il invented Juche ballroom dancing. It just means whatever the Kim family likes. 1968, and what was fun for me writing this book is you hear all these crazy stories, and then you do the research, and the reality is just as crazy. So 1968, the North Koreans captured a US ship, the Pueblo, killed one guy, held everyone else captive. They told the US prisoners, admit that you were spying on us and we'll free you. They said, we're not going to admit to that. So they started taking photos of them to release to the world to show that the Americans were being killed safely. And all the Americans, I forgot what branch of the military they were in, are in the picture, giving the finger, just like this, in the picture. It's ran in Time magazine. And the North Koreans asked them, what are you doing with your finger? They said, oh, it's a Hawaiian symbol of good luck. And then later, they said they had to write out an apology, and they said, we P-A-E-A-N, the great leader, we P-A-E-A-N on North Korea, which is pronounced Pyon, but if you look up in the dictionary, it means highest praise. When the North Koreans figured out what they were doing, they were subject to what one of the guys said is the worst torture ever imaginable, and they all had physical repercussions of this for the rest of their lives. This was almost a year. They were negotiating with President Johnson. And finally, one American had a brilliant idea. They said, okay, how about this? How about we write a confession, we apologize for what we did, but as we're writing this confession, we will say verbally, this confession is a lie, but we're only saying this to free our men. And the North Koreans like, oh yeah, that's fine. So literally, the guy came and says, I'm about to sign a document which is a lie. I'm only signing this to free my countrymen, and they're like, all right. Countrymen got out. That document that he signed is on display in North Korea alongside the Pueblo, which is the only U.S. ship which is not currently under custody of the USS Navy. There was another incident in the mid-70s where, so the border between North Korea and South Korea is called the Demilitarized Zone, or the DMZ. There was a tree that was blocking the U.S. view of the North. So the Americans came with an axe to chop down the tree without North Korean permission. The North Koreans took that axe and chopped up the Americans and killed, I think, 2 soldiers. And now that axe is proudly bloodstained and on display in the North. The Americans, as a response, launched Operation Paul Bunyan, where they came back with like 200 guys in all these planes, and they're like, screw you, and they chopped down that tree. They showed them. Come 1980, Kim Jong-il was announced that he was going to be the great leader Kim Il-sung's successor, which was crazy at the time because under communism, the idea that your son is going to inherit the leadership position is unconscionable. You know, under the communist ideology, everyone's equal shot, and they respond to this. Their whole point is like, look, you went from Stalin to Khrushchev, and you ruined the Soviet Union. You want to have a leader who's going to follow in the footsteps of the original as much as possible, and who better than the leader's son, in this case, they started calling him the dear leader. And then they started making up this mythology about Kim Jong-il, that he was born at the foot of Mount Paek-2, which is this mountain at the northeast of Korea, that when he was born the weather changed, and there was a new star in the sky. I wonder where they got that idea, and all sorts of other stuff. His mom became the Virgin Mary figure in North Korean mythology. She's always referred to as anti-Japanese heroine Kim Jong-suk, and she's always drawn in like this Korean dress, but she's always holding a gun. So it's like, you know, like you go to like some kind of cheap Chinese restaurant, you see these like kind of funny drawings, and it's the same thing, but the lady's got a handgun. It's just really off-putting. And when I went to the museum in North Korea, there was this picture of Kim Jong-il in chainmail riding a tiger holding a sword. And the funny thing is they don't have any sense of irony there. So you're looking at it and you're just like, this is just absolutely hysterical and amazing. So they start increasing the censorship and the oppression. Everyone in North Korea has to wear a badge with one of the leaders on their lapel with one of the leaders' faces on it. Everyone in North Korea, everyone has to have a wall in their house, with 2 pictures of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. Nothing else can be in that wall. The glass is at an angle so it doesn't get glare from the sun, and you have to dust it every day. If they come over to your house and it's dusty, it's going to be pretty bad. And they start doing something called criticism and self-criticism sessions. So everyone in North Korea is slotted into some group. It could be your neighborhood, it could be your school, it could be your office. Everyone, this has been going on since the 70s, once a week, you all get together and you say, this is what I did wrong this week, and this is what I saw you doing wrong. So it's like AA. So everyone in the country is spying at everyone else all the time. So this idea that you're all going to get together and kind of have a revolution is absolutely psychotic and impossible, because otherwise you're all going to pay the price along with your family. In fact, anyone who's a diplomat in North Korea, if you're going to travel abroad, you have to have family members staying behind, because if you're thinking of defecting, they're going to pay the price. And you're told this explicitly. Kim Il-sung dies in 1994, and this is right after the Soviet Union collapsed. So what happens is, for decades, Kim Il-sung had played the Soviet Union and China against each other. He got money from both of them. With the end of communism, neither of them wanted to give North Korea money. Now, North Korea is a heavily mountainous region. If you can't buy gasoline, you can't run your factories. If you can't run your factories, you can't make fertilizer. If you can't make fertilizer, you're not producing crops in a mountainous country. Starvation starts hitting. So first people start eating weeds, then they start eating bark, then they start eating, all animals are completely gone, grass, anything like that, cannibalism occurs. It got to the point where a disease came back. They even had cases of polio. They kept all this quiet because if the other countries realize there's a problem, it's going to be an excuse to overthrow the government. And there's a good reason they don't want to be overthrown, because if you look at Libya, you look at Iraq, you look at Romania, when these governments are taken down, the leaders themselves are personally killed. So even if they wanted to liberalize in North Korea, this would mean the deaths of the people at the top, and they know this perfectly well. In fact, in Romania, when the leader, Nicolae Ceausescu, was shot on television, Kim Il-sung took that video, showed it to all the party leaders every single day, and it says, this is going to be you if the masses ever rebel. So what happens is the UN came to try to help, and they would take them, and no one who spoke Korean was allowed to visit North Korea on these tours by law. So they would go to one town, and they would see 10 people, the people were healthy and happy, and then the North Koreans took them to another town, and then the third day they took them back to the first town. And the UN said, we were just here 2 days ago, and they go, no you weren't. And what are you gonna do with them? So they weren't allowed to give food to the North Koreans because Kim Jong-il said, if food is coming not from the government, it's going to make us superfluous. So he chose to let his people starve, and like I said earlier about the Sungbun, the credit rating, the people in the Northeast were the first ones to be denied food because they're hostile to the regime, so why do we need to feed them? And Kim Jong-il explicitly said, having too many people makes socialism difficult, so we had deaths of somewhere between 1 and 2 million. And the scariest sentence I've ever heard in my life, you watch these videos of these refugees, there's this great video which will make anyone with a shred of humanity cry, where they had all these refugees and they're giving them different types of American barbecue and they're all gorging themselves. And they're so normal that they just talk about these things and you're just, it's like, and one guy just says, when someone is about to die, the flies are the first to know. So you'll see a mom with her kid and the kid's still breathing, but then the flies start going in their mouth and their butt, and that's when you know that kid has seconds left. And it's like no human being should have this information other than maybe a doctor. And they all had to see death all around them. However, if you say something is wrong, you're criticizing the government because the government's in charge of anything. So you have to pretend everything is fine. You can't say, why is there no rice in the food distribution center? You just have to smile and nod. So this famine was completely devastating to the economy. When people talk about like, oh, what's it gonna take to overthrow the government? If you're happy letting 10% of your population starve, what's it gonna, it's not going, you don't care. So eventually Kim Jong-il said, screw this, send in the food. He took all the food for himself, gave some to the people, and sold what he needed to do and just made sure that the elites were well fed. And let's talk about these camps and how they're used as mechanisms of social control. So the UN in the last 5 years had a report about human rights in North Korea, and North Koreans said their response was, we don't use the phrase concentration camps, so we don't have any. It was literally their answer. They said, our definition of human rights is national sovereignty. So when you're criticizing our government, you're violating our human rights. They revel in the fact that they're giving the finger to their little country, and they're giving the finger to China, to Russia, to Japan, to everything else. Kim Jong-nam, who was recently murdered by Kim Jong-un, when he was alive, he was going to be the next one in charge. And he talked to Kim Jong-il, and he said, look at Beijing. Look at how great it is over there. People have food, and they've liberalized. And Kim Jong-il said, if you want openness, open a window. We're Korean. What worked for the Chinese won't work for us. And he passed him over for the youngest son, Kim Jong-un, because Kim Jong-un promised to stay the course and to be like the grandfather, the great leader Kim Il-sung. So when you go there, this is the backdrop. The thing that's weird is they all are so normal. They have great senses of humor. And I asked my guide, I go, tell me some North Korean jokes, and she goes, okay. Son goes to his mom and goes, Mom, I don't want to go to school today. I'll give you 2 good reasons. All the kids hate me and all the teachers hate me. And the mom goes, I'll give you 2 good reasons you have to go to school. You're the principal and you're 30 years old. So, and the other trick is they're so anti-Japanese and anti-American. If you take any racist joke you've ever heard and just put Japanese as the punchline, you're going to be the funniest person in the whole country. So if you say, how do you stop a Japanese man from drowning? Take your foot off his neck. My guide was crying. She's like, come on, more. So it's so brazen, and they're very, when my guide found out I was Jewish, she just kind of did a double take. So I'm like, even here, I'm not safe from this. So when you go there, every wall has a crack. There's a fly everywhere. Even on the plane, there was a fly. If you have an elevator bank with 4 buttons, one of them will be mismatched. There's something wrong wherever you go. You have to stay in a hotel which is on an island, which is nicknamed the Alcatraz of Fun. The floors are segregated by nationality. My guides couldn't go on my floor, for example. And they'll take you around to all these different places. They took us to a school. And the school is fake, and you know how it's fake because if you go to any school anywhere in the world, you're going to hear children laughing, you're going to hear noise. But we only heard the noise of the people we were with, And I'll never, till the day I die, these are the kids of the elites. So they're dressed in little general's clothes and they're adorable as hell. But those chest coughs, you hear them coughing, and you realize these have medicine. They're never going to have warm clothes. They're never going to have medicine. These are the best of the best. And when you put that in your mind, it's chilling. And I was talking to my guide, and she was very, very quick-witted in English. So they have something there called Cholima, which is a Pegasus and a symbol of speed. I go, look, if I want to send you something from abroad, what do you want me to send you? And she goes, a Porsche. And I go, lady, I'm not sending you a Porsche, and don't ask me to send you Cholima either. She goes, we have the original one here. What do I need you to send it to me for? And she wanted perfume. And my friend who I was with, she goes, what kind of perfume? And she's struggling for the words. Now imagine, it's hard enough to describe perfume when you're an American. How do you describe perfume if you can't buy any? And the word she was struggling for was feminine. She just wanted to smell pretty, but she can't, even though she's a millionaire in North Korea, because if they don't make it, you can't have it. And you go to the restaurants in Pyongyang, which are these great restaurants, and they have those, those cheap plastic table settings with like printed pictures of flowers and those plastic flowers, and it just looks terrible. And you realize these are these people's desperate attempt to have some semblance of beauty, where the best store they can shop at is the equivalent of our 99-cent stores, where you're getting Chinese-made products. So it's, they have these attempts to have elements of humanity, and whenever I went there, I would always get in people's faces and smile at them, because the reaction is going to be sincere. They're not going to be good at improv. And you have the grandmas with their grandkids, holding on to them, and you have the teenage girls giggling in that stereotypical Asian way, and you have the teenagers in their tracksuits, giving you the look while chewing gum like assholes. But they're so, I met a couple of refugees here, and one of them was like, I love the Hunger Games. It's just like being back in North Korea. And I'm like, am I allowed to laugh at this? So it's amazing how little this 70-year oppression has changed the character of these people. And when people ask me, like, what do I want for North Korea? All I want is for these people to be sitting in their recliners with a, Bush 10-pounder, whatever the hell they want to drink, farting up and watching TV, just like everyone else. That's all they need. South Korea has the highest per capita income of any place in Asia, and these people, some other refugee stories, like this one refugee, she was in South Korea, she swipes her card on the bus, the machine says, thank you, have a nice day, and she's like, what do I say? Or she started eating ice cream every meal because it's so good, and then she's wondering why she's gaining weight, because they're not taught about nutrition in North Korea. It's just like, of course you're gonna eat ice cream all the time if all your life all you've been eating is kimchi. Speaking of which, we say cheese and they actually say kimchi for pictures, and I'm like, isn't that racist? But it's not, because it's there. So the thing that's scary is the guides and the people in Pyongyang, they know it's all a lie. So they are smart, they know that it's all bullcrap, they know that Kim Il-sung can't literally walk on water, that he can't turn wood into bullets. They don't know that they started the Korean War. They're always taught that there's a book there called The U.S. Imperialists Started the Korean War. They don't know that, and one book I read compared it to, it would be like our finding out that FDR bombed the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. It's just like a total crazy thing for them. But when Kim Jong-il took over is when the famine hit. So he was either blamed for it or was powerless to prevent it. So he is nowhere near as popular as his father, who reigned North Korea from 1940s to 1994, when it was largely prosperous. From 1940s till the 1970s, North Korea was doing better than South Korea, so they're getting all this money from China and from Russia. It's only in the 80s when they started falling away. But South Korea, we have this propaganda in America that we think if a country's our ally, that they're just like us, but they just speak a different language and wear different clothes. In South Korea, the first lady was assassinated. Then another time, the head of the South Korean CIA killed the president. And then another time, the head of the Korean CIA just became the president. It's like, I'm president now. It was only in the 90s, I believe, or late 80s, where they became a functioning democracy. And, there's this one more funny story, but funny, haha, about North Korea. So in the 80s, Seoul, so North Korea and South Korea weren't official members of the UN for a while, because Russia and China were fighting and having them in. Seoul was awarded the 1984 Summer Olympics, or 1988. So Kim Jong-il calls them, he goes, hey, wouldn't it be great if we shared the Olympics? So it would be like a big symbol of Korean unity. And South Korea goes, well, it's awarded to a city, not a country. It's not up to us to share it with you. And we don't think you guys have the facilities for this. And Kim Jong-il's like, come on. And they're like, no. He's like, okay. So he blew up one of their airliners and killed like 200 people on board. What happened is he had 2 spies. They got on at like there was a layover, I think in Bahrain. They put a bomb safely in the overhead compartment. They got off the plane. The bomb went off somewhere in the ocean. Everyone died. They got arrested. The man and the woman started smoking cyanide-laced cigarettes like James Bond. He died, she didn't. And they're like, where are you from? She's like, Japan. And they're like, okay, where'd you grow up? Like, what was your street? What was your favorite candy? What was your favorite TV show? She didn't know any of this. They finally break her down. She admits on TV, she's from North, and they sent her to do this. She got pardoned by the South Korean president. So she admitted to blowing up a plane and killing a couple hundred people, and they're like, oh, this was Kim Jong-il's fault, you're free to go. She's walking around Seoul right now. So this would kind of be the equivalent of Bill Clinton pardoning Timothy McVeigh. So this is how weird that region is. I think I covered a lot. So the question is, Wendy, what can we do about this awful, awful place? They have nukes. They are ready to fire those nukes. The question is, are they going to attack Japan or South Korea? There's 2 kinds of bank robbers. There's the bank robber who goes in, shoots up the ceiling, says, give me all your money. And there's the bank robber who runs in, shoots up the people, and takes the money. The first one is easy to deal with. He doesn't want trouble, he just wants money. The second one's the one you got to worry about. They've been lobbing missiles into the Sea of Japan. They could have hit Seoul since the 50s. For a country that's supposed to be suicidal, they're really bad at it, because they've been around much longer than any of these other countries. So they are very aware of how easily they can be killed. They're not suicidal. Every year, they have this whole thing, we're going to nuke everybody. Every year, the American press wrings their hands. And every year, they get a bribe from the US government or from someone else. And lather, rinse, repeat. However, it is only in the last month where China has said they're going to stop taking coal shipments from them and is starting to put the squeeze on them, because China is the big holdout, because the Tumen River separates China and North Korea. China doesn't want 20 million refugees who have never seen a computer, who don't speak Chinese, swarming over that river, and you can't blame them. So the only way you're going to have a solution is A, the elites have to have some kind of escape hatch where they're guaranteed their safety or whatever, and B, it's going to be China, Japan, South Korea, Russia, and us kind of coming together and rebuilding that country in some kind of little Marshall Plan. So I know I covered a lot. I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions. I cover a lot of this stuff in my book as well, but any questions, please, let's hear them. Go ahead.
I watched a documentary not too long ago, I think it was on Nat Geo, with the eye surgeon from Nepal going.
Okay, let's talk about, okay, this is a perfect example of how the West gets it wrong. There was this video, a National Geographic documentary, and there were all these people who had cataracts or were blind. And they took them to, I think it was a UN doctor or something like that.
Right.
He gave them this 15-minute surgery. They could regain their sight.
Thousands of them.
And the first thing they do is start crying and they thank Kim Jong-il. And they're like, thank you, Kim Jong-il, for restoring my sight. What we don't realize, just like people who watch reality TV, they're on camera. If you're on camera, the first thing out of your mouth better be thanking the leader. Because if it's not, you are going to be in trouble. Laura Ling, or Lisa Ling, whatever her name was, who should be shot, she was in Pyongyang, she's interviewing a family, and she asked them on camera, can Kim Jong-il do anything wrong? What the hell do you want them to say? And they just sat there pretending they didn't understand her, which is smart ad-libbing. So yeah, go to a foreign country where the leader can execute you like this and say, hey, say something bad about the leader. This is gonna be in front of your kids, on camera. This is gonna end well. It's just mind-boggling how people think it's just like they all just vote Republican or vote Democrat. They have guns to their head, and they know it, and they're reminded of this all the time. The Vice documentary series, there was this one moment where he goes to this giant Shane Smith goes to this giant ballroom, and they put plates on all these tables, and the ballroom's empty, and he asked the waitress, she goes, where's everybody? And the waitress goes, oh, they just left. Ha ha ha, what an idiot. Well, you can't have her, she's not going to say this ballroom is a waste of space and we're wasting this food for nobody, because that's criticism. You have to not pretend the government's doing everything right all the time, especially if there's a camera on you. Because again, if you are in Pyongyang, you're a member of the favored class, and maybe you're not going to be executed, but how would you like to go from living in Manhattan to living in the coal mines of West Virginia when you've never held a hoe in your life? and now you have to struggle to raise enough rice for you and your family to live on, and you're never going to have electricity again. So we have to realize what it is we're watching, and especially Western reporters, it's really shameful how they take things at face value at a country whose entire apparatus is about deception and sleight of hand. It's weird and shameful. Okay, any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
How do you think the events over in North Korea compare to kind of, other events throughout the world? So, we have a lot of conflict in the Middle East, right? But there it's mostly about religion, and it's mostly, it's people speaking different languages. But I don't know if maybe you could elaborate on.
Well, it's the worst country in the world by almost any metric. The average height in North Korea is 4 inches shorter than the South, even though they're genetically identical. There's another thing, that they have something in North Korea called kochebi, which means sparrows, because the children, you have all these homeless children, because their parents starved, and they're hopping around in the dirt looking for food, just like birds. And they have big heads because they're malnourished and they don't grow. And I asked a refugee, I'm like, do you see this as your heartbreak? And she goes, no, because they're a nuisance. And when this is your normalcy, you stop seeing, like in New York with homeless people, you start seeing them as humans, and you start seeing them as like a roach. So the level of inhumanity, it's impossible for us as Americans to wrap our heads around. Like, I went there to see what my family went through, like under Stalin back in the day, but even then, it's impossible for us to imagine emotionally what that's like when that's your 24/7. We cannot possibly wrap our heads around it. So it's just, and the thing with the Middle East is they all have access to outside information. You can go on the Arab Spring, they're on Snapchat, they're on all these things. They don't have computers there. So they are increasingly learning about the outside world, but it's very, very limited, and it's very, very dangerous for them. So it's much worse than people think. Anyone else?
As an American, you said you were separated by floor, and they take you everywhere?
So when you're there,
you get an agenda, a daily agenda. We're going here.
When you're there, you're part of a tour group, which sounds a lot more ominous than it is, because if you go to London, you can be part of a tour group and you're taken around every day. So it's not that weird. What's weird is the places they choose. Like, here's a bottle factory that's not operational. It's like, I have bottle factories that aren't working back home. Well, actually, that's not true. Ours work, but it's just like, this is what you're showing me. I want to go to the ostrich ranch. They didn't take us to the ostrich ranch. There's one. So the guides aren't allowed on your floor, but you go on the elevator to your floor, but you're not allowed to leave the hotel. There's a parking lot, but past that there's guards. At all times you're with, but again, your guides are, and how the tour groups work, the tour group is a coalition between the government and a Western company, and the Western company has a lot of influence, and they make sure they have guides who are savvy. Like, for example, my guides heard the song Gangnam Style. She didn't understand half the lyrics, but she knew what it was. She'd seen Titanic, she'd read Jane Eyre. There's some movies that they're allowed to watch. So, and when you meet, this is what's really fascinating. What they know and what they don't know and what they think they know. So I asked her about 9/11. She's like, of course we know about that. They showed it on all the TVs. Well, obviously they're going to show America getting hit, on the TVs. I told her my favorite fable, which is Aesop's fable of the fox and the scorpion, which is the fox and the scorpion went across the water. The scorpion goes, let me jump on your back. The fox goes, how do I know you won't sting me? And the scorpion goes, well, we both drowned. The fox is like, all right, hop on. Halfway through, the scorpion stings the fox. As they're both drowning, the fox goes, why did you sting me? And the scorpion goes, such is my nature, right? And she goes, well, what's a scorpion? And I'm like, like a scorpion. And she's like, I don't know what that is. I'm like, okay, maybe it's a language thing. So I'm like, like the lobster lives in the desert. She's like, I drew it. She had never heard of it. Now, think about how many times we've heard of scorpions from comic books, movies, the Zodiac, and because they don't have them there, she doesn't know what it was. So she thinks she's informed, but it's bizarre what the holes are in their logic and what aren't, and it's very counterintuitive. That blew my mind completely. Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions?
So one of the things you said was And I think I got it right. The guide asked the guide what she wanted, and
Yeah.
she said abortion. He said no, and then she said about perfume.
I got her the perfume.
Okay, so the question is, so if she gets the perfume, and let's say they do a like a search, the government, would she be in trouble because she has something from?
Yes. So this is what's great about North Korea. As the government is running out of money to pay the goons, the wealthy people are becoming more corrupt and are paying them off. So if I'm rich and you come to my house and take my family away, I give you cash and you look the other way. So that is a very healthy step toward the collapse of the government, because once people stop having faith in authority, that's really the last step before that authority goes away completely. So increasingly the case, it's like the military are hungry, and they have these little bazaars where people are trading with China and so on and so forth, and these people are cash rich, and that's a very, very, and then they have, of course, disdain for the government because the government's just an impediment to them. So what else is interesting is they'll trade a lot, like people across the river with China, you pay the border guard his cut, it's just like kind of like a tariff, effectively. So if you're doing that, you get a slap on the wrist. But if you go to China and you talk to like a Christian, or you've met a Christian, you're really in trouble, because they can't have anyone competing with their state religion. And if you are, let's talk about the camps, one more thing. If you were like because a lot of these women are sold into sexual slavery in China. If you got pregnant, they will force an abortion, because you're not going to have a Korean woman have her seed ruined with Chinese seed. In these camps, there's punishments within the camps. So your whole family has to have a work quota, right, to produce. If you kill yourself, your family still has to do your work. So even suicide is not an escape in these camps. Then if you're a troublemaker, you'll get sent to the mines, where your skin will start sloughing off, because these men literally never leave the mines, so they don't have vitamin D. Then there are things like you're not allowed to have sex with the guards. If you get raped, there was a case where a woman got raped, so they ran her over with a truck, cut her legs off, and now she has to go to work pushing herself on a tire. So it's absolutely mind-boggling how low it can get, and it's terrifying to me how little is being done about this. And I don't know that there's an easy answer, but I have to think that there's some answer. And by the way, Madeleine Albright, who said there's a special place in hell for women who don't vote for a woman, who escaped the Nazis, she raised the glass. This is the story. So when I was doing research for the book, they told a story about how when Madeleine Albright goes anywhere, she wears a pin to demonstrate her mood. And when she met Kim Jong-il, she was so taken with him that she wore a pin of a heart to show her appreciation of friendship. So anything where they talk about Western stuff, I had to do the independent verification. I found the photo. She's walking down the hall with the pin of a heart, and she even wrote a book called Read My Pins, talking about how she wears pins to show her emotions. And there's a famous photo of her raising her glass to him, while miles away, children are starving in these camps, very similar to the camps she escaped from as a kid. Now, I can get the argument that you have to be nice to these dictators to try to kind of affect change. I get it. But spare me your sermonizing when you're kind of toasting this person who's consciously chosen to have 10% of his population starve, including children. Yes?
So say you were an advisor to Trump or Rex Tillerson.
Yeah.
What would you advise them to do about North Korea?
They're doing the right thing, which is leaning on China. China's literally the only thing left to do is change the Chinese minds. And I would tell them we will pay whatever it takes, and we'll get Japan and South Korea to pay whatever it takes to kind of make sure you guys don't have to bear an unfair burden. Because China is sick of China's trying to be dignified, they're trying to be a world leader, they're trying to have this respectability, and they're making apologies for this this backward, degenerate regime. It's not a good look for them. So they would, if they had those reassurances, that would, as China, right? I'm trying to be America's rival on the world stage. How the hell do you defend Kim Jong-nam being executed in an airport with poison in his face? You can't do that and be a civilized country with a straight face. And that's why they're like, all right, this is enough. This is ridiculous.
Well, I would think they'd be more worried about having nukes in North Korea.
The nukes are there, but the nukes aren't going to hit China.
Well, not right now.
No, they have no reason. And China would be their only friend. The nukes are going to hit Tokyo, Or, I mean, there's this thing about, like, oh, what
But
if...
if North Korea goes and they hit Japan, right?
Yeah,
Then China has to deal with it.
sure.
Because China is essentially,
The rest of the world.
you know, back them up.
Yeah, China is, right, well, right,
So-
correct. That's the last, right, so that's why China
That's what I'm
has
saying.
to, China has to be the one, the last domino standing.
Yeah.
So it's hopefully, I don't, Kim Jong-un is not a strong leader, so if anyone wants to go now, because I don't think it's gonna be around for much longer, at this rate especially. Because Kim Jong-nam, his brother, you have to be a relative of Kim Il-sung to be a leader. So if you're wiping out Plan B, it's because you're scared that you're replaceable. You know, and he's the world's youngest leader. He's like in his 20s. So I mean, and increasingly the grip is slipping on North Korea. So
Guesstimate how long? How many years?
I would say under 5.
Really?
I mean, if China is already making public moves,
Wow.
public, this isn't behind the scenes. They're like press release. We're not taking your coal. That's big.
Yeah.
If the UN is already, which is defends every dictator just by its nature, kind of has to kind of play fair. If they're like screw this, that's a big deal, in my opinion. Go ahead.
But the economy there is bad as it is, and the fact that they're not producing anything.
Right.
And without the financial support they used to get from Russia and reduced financial support from China, how are they financing the development of their military? How is their military? How do they continue making missiles? How do they continue financing their military?
Because everyone's a slave laborer in the whole country. And they do a lot of illegal stuff. So Kim Jong-nam, who was just killed, was in Japan in the 90s, and he was caught with a fake passport. And they said, why were you here? And he said with a straight face, I was here to visit Disneyland. And all the reporters like, ha ha ha, what an idiot, when he was there to get cash for an arms shipment. And this was the Japanese government's way of telling him we're watching you. So they're big on that. They're big producers of drugs. They're apparently one of the world's biggest counterfeiters. So it's basically like a gangster regime. And everyone who works for the regime's job they were kicked out of several countries because they would like exploit diplomatic immunity, like smuggling, vodka and things like that, and avoid laws. So everyone who works for the government's job is to raise funds to make for the Kim family. So, and again, it's like guns and it's like how did the Soviet Union put Sputnik up? It's because if you're going to let the people go hungry, you're still going to have enough money to go somewhere else. So, and they're again raw materials they have a fair amount of, but if China's not taking them, that's a huge chunk out of their budget. And they get foreign aid, which they subvert to their own purposes as well. But weapons sales is a big one. Yes.
What's kind of the country like outside of Pyongyang?
It's totally rural, no electricity, everyone's dirty, you're not really having running water. Just like in most countries, you go to the rural areas, they are the true believers. Like there's this one story, a book I read, where the guy lived in Pyongyang and he went back to visit his family in the countryside, and they're all in rags and they're starving, and they give him some rice to give to the leader. Because Kim Jong-un works so hard for us, he's hungry, here, take our food, it's okay that we don't have any. So and again, when you have no access to the outside world, you're gonna believe whatever you're told. So yeah, and I asked my guide, because the propaganda is the farmers are the best people ever, right? I asked once a year, everyone in the country, everyone, has to go to the countryside and help with the rice harvest. And I'm like, oh, I told my guide, oh, that sounds nice. She's like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, America, people in the cities have disdain for rural areas. Is it the same thing here? She's like, of course. So, they speak South Korean slang in Pyongyang. They really think they're cosmopolitan, and they have complete disdain for the countryside and vice versa. Because people in the country are like, oh, those people in Pyongyang think they're so much better than us. Well, by law, they are. Yes, go ahead.
You brought up like the whole like drugs operation thing, and I know there's like the government bureau that just counterfeits money,
Right.
and then they have like cocaine and like heroin and stuff. Can you just like?
It's more crystal meth that they produce in heroin, yeah.
Jeez. Okay. That's cool.
So they use that a lot because it fights hunger, crystal meth. So it's very common in the Northeast. Any other questions?
They get it out through China, or how do they
Yeah.
get it out? Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. You pay the guy at the border, he gets a cut. It's
That's the
perfectly
only way to
fine.
get it out, I guess.
Good. The more people who are making their money independently of the regime, the more they're going to view the regime with contempt and as an impediment. So I'd rather they let them sell the drugs, I don't care. As long as they're getting food. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you see them doing another purge, like, do you think that it's possible that the government could purge the wealthier class in order to remain in power?
Well, they purge people constantly.
Right,
So
but do they purge the upper class?
it's not a class-based purge, but they purge
Or
like
the
factions.
middle class?
No, I mean, that's all been sorted out already, so it'll be, like, Kim Jong-un killed his uncle and things like that, but if you're at the top of North Korea right now, you're not there because you're smart, you're there because you're loyal. So, and again, everyone's watching everybody. So you know how to do that dance at the very top, at the very least. So purges are not that, it's not like in Russia, because in Russia you had the purges because you'd have a new leadership, whereas here you have this family leadership, so. But no, when Kim Jong-il took over, he purged a lot of Kim Il-sung's people, sent him to the countryside. He sent his uncle to be ambassador to Poland, effectively exiling him. He sent Kim Il-sung's wife, he had her under armed guard all the time until she went insane. So, and Kim Jong-un didn't do as much because when Kim Jong-un took over in 2011, Kim Jong-il's sister, his aunt, she kind of guided the path. And she's another piece of work. Her daughter married someone with a low sungbun, so she drove her to suicide. So these people are monsters on a level we can't even imagine. And that also really, every time you see some dumbass politician comparing like Trump or Hillary to North Korea, it's insane and unconscionable. And it's laziness of the lowest order. Anyone else?